So the next thing I wanted to do with the 97 GT was work on the tune and make sure that I would be able to return the computer to stock, because I'm putting a stock 2 valve in it. It had a stroker 5 liter with cams and everything in it right now, but I want to return it to stock, or as close to stock as possible, and maybe even have to get a new tune for it with the PI heads and everything. The GT came with this itsx. It's a OBD2 plug-in, and it runs off Bluetooth, and you can run your phone or an iPad with it to load tunes onto the computer. And so I plugged this in under the dash to try to see if I could return the computer to stock and do all that stuff with it, and it wouldn't work at all. And it actually turned out to be kind of a nightmare. I did a whole bunch of testing and I looked through a whole bunch of fuses, and the fuses were all good where they should have been, but luckily I got some advice on the SN95 Facebook page, and someone had said it doesn't matter what fuses are supposed to be good, check all your fuses. And so I looked through the fuse diagrams and I was actually surprised. I started pulling fuses and I found one that was blown, and it was for something totally different. This exact thing had happened with my Red Cobra and my Red Mach 1, where my gauges that were run by the OBD2 port were actually blowing the fuses for the data link, which was fuse number 1 on those cars, but these fuses are different. And oddly enough, it turned out that it was number 8 on this car that was the problem, and in the manual it says that it runs the courtesy lamps, radio, power mirror, remote keyless entry, and clock. But once I replaced that fuse, I had power to the OBD2 or data link again now, so when I plug it in it would light up and everything. So I was very excited to get that figured out. It was actually quite a headache, and I was kind of worried that I had some more problems. Now this car has the dash out of a 2001 GT in it, so underneath there's a lot of things that are out of place and wires that are all bundled together and a lot of things that shouldn't be where they are. And so in all this research and looking through everything and checking wires, I did notice that the main power wire to the battery was totally messed up. It's this one on the right that's crunched there. So I had one of these big aftermarket ones for a sound system, so I crimped that one on in its place and replaced that. So that's all fixed now and looks a lot better. And I also noticed that the alternator power wire had both the wires bare and torn out, so I tried replacing those as well. So there's just been a lot of things like this ground underneath the dash that went to nothing, and I grounded that. And so now that that was all figured out and I was able to get that working, I got the new engine prepped. You can see it there in the foreground. And then I just decided it was time to start pulling the engine. And so I like to work late at night on the cars when it's cool out, and I just decided to start pulling the engine out myself and see how far along I would get, because I was doing this all alone and everyone was asleep and my brother wasn't around or anything. And so I hooked up the chains and thought, well, I'll start pulling this out. I had taken off the intake manifold and got everything ready to go. And so I just started going slowly at it and actually using the floor jack on the bottom to hold the transmission where it needed to be until I could get the angle right, and just slowly pulled it out and checked the wiring harnesses, checked everything, make sure I wasn't ripping anything out. The transcooler lines were something that I did forget about. I started to tug on those, but I got under and noticed they were there, so I unbolted those. And so slowly the engine was coming out more and more and more, and I just kept checking it all. And I've done this several times. I've done it with a few GTs in the past and a Terminator and stuff, so I usually pull them out the top like this. And so I got it all out by myself at about 2 in the morning and then put it right down on a pallet safely, and that's where I was able to get the engine all out and ready and prepped to do the next phase on it. So here's the open engine bay. It looks like a mess, but it really isn't that complicated when you know where everything goes and when you've done this a few times. And so underneath you can see there's the car and jack stands, and this is the drivetrain of the car. So there's the built automatic transmission and stroker engine with headers and everything on it. And so the next thing to do is take the torque converter bolts off so I can separate the transmission from the engine and get the old engine on an engine stand. So here's the new drivetrain, and here's the old transmission, which is actually a built auto with a nice flywheel, and this is a B&M flywheel, which I can't use because it's an 8 bolt. and because the stroker crank has an 8-bolt and this other Romeo engine's a 6-bolt. So this is the old engine, and I checked the plugs and just tried to see how it looked, and they looked really good for what the car was. And so there wasn't any detonation or any bent plugs or anything. It was just a spun bearing as far as I know. I'm going to get around to rotating the engine now that's on a stand and everything. And so now it was time to turn my attention to the new drivetrain and get everything prepped and ready and get ready to go in the car. One thing I did was look down in each of the spark plug holes, and I noticed there's some junk and debris down in there, and I thought this would be a really great time to clean that all out while the engine's out of the car, and I can access those spark plug holes so much easier than trying to reach over the fenders and everything. So I got the shop vac and I sucked out as much as I could from those spark plug holes because I was going to pull all the plugs out and I didn't want the junk that was in there to fall down into the cylinders. And so I did use a straw and a shop vac to get as much out as I could, but there was still some gunk down there that I could scrape around with a screwdriver, and what I ended up doing was actually shooting water with that water bottle down there down into each spark plug hole when the spark plug was still in it, and I cleaned around and broke loose all the debris and stuff and then sucked it all out with a shop vac, so I made sure that I was getting everything out. Surprisingly, I put the shop vac itself over each spark plug hole and it wouldn't get all the water out. So I was reluctant to use water, but it was just at the point where that's the only thing I could do to break it up and get everything out of there. So what worked the very best to get all the water out was the shop vac with a McDonald's straw, and I was able to use that as a smaller little extension to get all the water out of the spark plug holes. And so I cleaned that up all really well, and I sucked all the ports out of the intake, and then I put masking tape over the intake ports so no junk or debris could get down in there. And now I did take a lot of time looking over everything and getting ready for the swap, and I'm glad I took some time to look at the connectors on the transmission because they are different. So the transmission that came out of the car, the one sitting over there with the blue torque converter on it, that is a 99 plus transmission that is built and has upgraded everything in it, but being that it's a 99 plus, the speedometer doesn't work with the 97 and the older generation because it's digital. And so that was actually an issue. The car never had a speedometer in it when the previous owner had done all this to the car, and they had that transmission built not knowing that it wouldn't be compatible. So you have to run an app on your phone or use GPS to have a speedometer. And so I knew that the new transmission going in the car was also out of a 99 plus. This is an 03 drivetrain. But the issue I had when I started looking was that the connectors on the transmission are totally different. So when the previous owner had that transmission built, they actually had all the older style connectors and everything built into it, and so that's why the old transmission, even though they're the same generation, has all the old connectors and plugs on it. And that's why it worked in the car, but the pins on the harness were different, so I wouldn't have been able to plug in the harness that's on the car into this new transmission. And the more research I did, the more I realized that they are not going to work. And so at this point I was either going to have to take both transmissions apart and drop the valve bodies and change the connectors, or I could just put that built automatic back in the car since it's already done. So at this point it was a lot easier to go ahead and take the transmission off of this new engine, because all I had to do was take off the bell housing bolts and the torque converter 4 bolts and separate it and put the old transmission on. That to me was a lot better of an idea, and I know that the new transmission and the new torque converter are all brand new and they worked good when I drove the car around with it, so I thought that that was probably the better option to do. But I was glad that I took the time to look around, because it would have been an absolute nightmare to get this drivetrain back in the car and then figure all that out and then have to pull the transmission off while it's under the car, because man, that's always a nightmare. I've done that 21 times now. I've pulled transmissions off Mustangs 21 times. I've counted. And so I was glad I noticed that so I don't have to do that again. So anyway, looking over the car though, these boxes were in the car. This is the stroker kit that was actually in the old engine, and so I thought that was kind of cool to show that. and to just look over this new engine. Like I said, it had a lot of good parts. It had upgraded pistons and rods. It had a lot of money put into it. And so now that I have the old engine out and it's on an engine stand, I'll be able to rotate it upside down and take off the oil pan and start disassembling it and looking at the crank to see if it's damaged from the spun bearing. It'll be something that I'll work on eventually, but in the meantime, it's nice to enjoy the other Mustangs like the Blue Mach 1 that I've been daily driving. It's nice to have a car that's turnkey and runs great, and I've just been enjoying driving it around in the Cobras and still having fun, because these projects do get a little overwhelming sometimes, and it's nice to have another car that you can just jump in and go to lunch and go on a date with my wife and enjoy. So anyway, that's the update on the 97 GT. I'll keep you up to date on what's going on with it and as we progress with this. And I put the playlist to this car in this video, so you can watch all the videos and the progress of the car if you'd like. And stay tuned for more of these videos, and thanks for watching.